Good afternoon and good morning to some of you on the West Coast. My name is Rob Shuster and I'll be presenting our webinar today. It is unfortunate that we have to talk about this kind of a topic. It is unpleasant to talk about for businesses, but it is, given the disturbing frequency of these events now, it used to be we'd see these on television once a year. Now we're seeing it once a week. So it is something that needs to be addressed. And today we're going to be talking about some of the specifics of what plans should contain in terms of occupant response, how to survive active shooter situations, and as well as the specifics of coming up with a specific active shooter response plan for your facility and what should be considered in that planning phase. I want to begin by just giving you my background. Years and years ago, I was a police officer, so I come out of law enforcement. For the last 25 to 30 years, I've been in the private sector, primarily in executive protection, crisis management, workplace violence prevention, consulting with clients interested in those programs. It's been in about the last 10 years or so that there's been more of a focus on active shooter response. And unfortunately, the incidents happening worldwide are driving that. I want to begin. So my perspective today, the reason I shared that is because I look at this problem and the response to this problem and the preparation for this problem from two perspectives: that of a corporate consultant in helping companies design programs, as well as that of law enforcement, and understanding the perspective of those police officers and sheriff's deputies and whoever else is going to respond that come to your property to help you. There are things that we'll talk about today that will make their job a lot easier and allow them to help you a lot more readily. I would like to begin by talking about some of the biggest mistakes that organizations make in not even addressing this, and that they stay in denial. These are in quotes because there are things that have been mentioned to me or stated to me by clients that don't believe they will have the problem. It is a very, granted, low possibility, percentage-wise, that you will be affected by this. However, this form of workplace violence has the highest price. It is the most violent manifestation of it, and because of that, on the outside remote chance that your business could be affected by this, you need to prepare for it. You cannot take the attitude, it wouldn't happen here, because we're so close. We're like family. I've heard all the excuses. It can happen anywhere. It has happened at airports. It has happened in businesses. It has happened in schools. It's happened in restaurants. It's happened in office buildings, in theaters. It can happen just about anywhere, and nowhere is immune. It's happened in manufacturing facilities. So it's not that you want to dwell on it, but you need to have a plan to prepare for it and to make sure that your personnel, your employees, your occupants know what to do to increase their chances of survivability. The other excuse I will get is that, well, the police will handle it. And that's true. They will when they get there. If you don't have a police officer sitting at the ready in your parking lot, it's going to take a few minutes for those patrol officers to get to your facility, even in such an emergency. These typical active shooter situations are done. They're over in 3 to 5 minutes. And a lot of times police response, even though it's good, it might be 2 to 3 minutes. So you need to have a plan that allows your personnel, whether it's employees, occupants, whomever, the best chance of surviving those initial minutes before the police get there to help you. The other excuse I get is, well, it won't happen here because we have good security. Now, I'll give you that good security is a component of a well-rounded plan and any protective or preventive effort you're putting forth. But good security will not guarantee that this won't happen to you. These things typically happen for one of three reasons. It is a domestic situation that's gone bad. And if you think about it, in a domestic violence situation, if the abused spouse gets a restraining order from the courts, it keeps the abuser away from the home, typically. Now, what is the next logical place that the abuser is going to find that person? At their place of work. So organizations need to realize that if there is domestic abuse situations, maybe not even happening at the office, but that are happening at home, that may follow the employee into work. So the second reason is that it's a disgruntled former employee. Now, you have some control over that in that you have terminated the employee. There's probably been some concern over that termination. You may have taken some safeguards, and you obviously are going to capture badges, any keys, any access cards they may have, and you'll communicate to security that they're not to be back on property. Eventually, all the employees will know they're not to be back on property. So there's a little bit you can do about the disgruntled former employee, though you never know how long it might take for them to come back if they're predisposed to do that. These have sometimes been carried out by a disgruntled current employee. And you can have all the good security in the world, but they're getting in because they have a badge. So it's not about having good security that is an excuse for not having a plan. One that I will frequently get an excuse is, we don't want to scare our people. Well, believe me, you're not going to scare your people more than they already are by just talking about this situation. In every instance where I talk to employee groups, and I've done this for a number of years now, we're not creating a fear that doesn't otherwise exist. They watch these TV news reports too. And they've often sat back and said, well, I wonder what I should do. I wonder what the police want me to do. I wonder what my company wants me to do. Where should I go? Absent those answers, there's more fear in their minds. So you're not going to scare your people by addressing the situation. Staying in denial won't keep more fear in their hearts than anything. You need to address it and give them the tools for surviving this. People should know just to get out. That's another excuse. Well, that's true. They should, but common sense doesn't always prevail. If somebody's shooting in a building, you get out of that building. That is common sense. And these are very emotionally charged, panic-driven situations. And clear thinking doesn't always drive what people do. Common sense doesn't always drive what they do. They need to have been trained and have at least mentally prepared for it in their minds. Therefore, they might be more likely to do the right things in the response mode when it's an actual event. This will cost too much. Believe me, what it might cost you to either deal with a company that specializes in this to help you develop a plan, or to develop your own plan and then train your people on that plan, will pale in comparison to if you stay in denial, do nothing, and the unforeseeable happens and you just leave your people to fend for themselves. You'll have much higher costs and probably much more loss of life and damage because of it. What if someone gets hurt because of our plan? That is not a reason to not have a plan. If you have a good plan, one that's well thought out, and I should say right now, before I forget to say it, that these plans should be developed in conjunction with local law enforcement, because basically the police need to know what you're going to do and you need to know what they're going to do. But if you have a good plan, it's far better off than the chance that that plan may cause someone to be hurt. Now, let's call it something else as another excuse, because, and it's consistent with, we don't want to scare our people. But I don't do that. When I make presentations, when I deal with employee groups, when I'm talking to organizations, it is what it is. You cannot powder puff it. You can't deny what it is. It is a violent situation, and you have to say exactly what you're talking about. This is an act. It's a unique situation where someone has come into your property with the intent of shooting a particular target or targets, and then they randomly continue through the hallways or the aisleways or wherever, and they continue to shoot people randomly until one of three things happen. They either run out of ammunition, they commit suicide, or the police come in and end it for them. This is unlike any other crime that I am familiar with in law enforcement, It's not consistent with, and the responses to it would not be the same as any other armed confrontation, like a robbery attempt or a hostage taking. Most criminals, even the more violent criminals, they have a plan to escape. It might not be a good plan, it might not be very well thought out, but they have somewhat of a plan to get away. The active shooter typically does not. Very rarely do they think about it in terms of getting away with this. Usually they've planned to end their life that day, either by their own hand or by that of the police. Unfortunately, they've been determined to take a lot of people with them. And that level of absolute twisted determination can drive some unusual tactics on their part. And it calls for some unique police tactics, as well as tactics on the part of the business occupants to get out. And we'll talk about those. So this is a very unique situation, unlike any other crime situation that might call for more traditional response. What's critical in the initial phases of an individual's response, someone who might be in a facility where there is an active shooter, time is absolutely critical. Their ability to quickly react to the situation once it has come to their attention, and we'll talk about the notification process, but once it's come to your attention as a building occupant, whether you're an employee or just an occupant in this business, that there's an active shooter in the building, time is absolutely critical for you to get out immediately any way you can. And I mean any way you can. Out a window, out a door, out a loading bay door. Don't get locked into traditional exits and entrances. Your hesitation of a mere 30 seconds, once it comes to your attention that this is the problem the building has, could be the difference between your getting out from behind your workstation or out of your office, down a hallway and out a door safely, and you're getting out from behind your workstation, down a hallway, right into the pathway of the shooter. Because these people typically move very dynamically, very quickly. There's no hesitation. They're shooting people randomly with no hesitation, no remorse, and they typically will move fairly quickly. So no hesitation is your key to survival. The other thing is to have a mental plan. You'll hear me say that repeatedly through the presentation. You can't think clearly at the moment. Don't think, well, I'll know what to do at the time. You won't. The panic, the confusion, the noise, the screaming, everything that's going on around you is going to cloud your judgment. So you need to have thought about it ahead of time. Think about those possible exits and know all the exits in the facility, not just those that you commonly use, because you may not be at your workstation when this happens. You don't know where you would be in the facility. You could be all the way across the other end of the facility and not be familiar with that part of the building, and this happens. You need to know where all of the exits are so that you can develop that mental plan. Now, I'm not saying you need to dwell on this. Geez, it would make you crazy. But the next time, after we get through this presentation, you'll be armed with enough material and enough know-how that the next time you see this on television, you'll be able to answer those questions of what you should do, where you should go, and how you should conduct yourself. So no hesitation. Once it comes to your attention that this is the problem, you need to get out immediately. And we'll talk about other options as well. So you say, okay, that's we agree with that, Rob, but how's it going to come to our attention? We have, for example, a massive industrial facility. It's not a small office building where the sound of shots might be heard throughout. This is a large industrial complex. How are we going to know what our problem is? Your primary means of notification should be some form of public address system, some audible warning system, whether that's the use of a PA system that has been installed or is currently installed or is part of an intercom system. I've talked to clients that would turn their phones. They had the ability to turn their phone system into an intercom system. White noise systems have been modified to become PA systems. But some type of public address system where you can give an audible, verbal message in no uncertain terms. There is an active shooter in the building. Please evacuate immediately. Something along those lines. Furthermore, if based on initial reports, you know the location of the shooter, that information should also go out on that announcement because that tells people which way not to evacuate towards. It's common sense. So it's important to consider for your facility as part of your plan what your notification system is going to be. Don't depend on radios. Don't depend on cell phones. Those are backup systems. I believe in duplicate effort, redundant systems. Use mass texting systems. Use email. Use cell phones. Use radios if you have them on the facility. But some type of public address system is the best process because that way everybody hears. And you might even want to pair that with a visual warning similar to alerts that are on walls for fire alarms or tornado warnings. Have it unique, a unique color or a unique strobe that is only for active shooter. What I do not want you to do is use the fire alarm for notification in the event of an active shooter. That will get the wrong responses from your occupants. Just think about it. What happens in a fire alarm? Most people look at each other and say, well, okay, I guess we're having a fire alarm. Let's go ahead and get out. And they march down at their own pace. Sometimes that's not a real fast one. A predetermined evacuation route. And there's no sense of urgency. It's just another fire drill. Well, if somebody's going through my facility with a gun shooting people, I want the notification of that event to carry with it a little more sense of urgency. I don't want them to go down any pre-designated pathway because that pre-designated fire evacuation route may be in fact where the shooter is. People have to think for themselves based on what they see and hear. When they hear the announcement, they should be thinking, okay, listening for the sound of shots, listening for the sound of the confusion and the crying and the yelling and screaming that are going to go along with shots. And avoid those areas. Evacuate in the closest direction to a door. Might not be the door they use all the time, but they should have several alternatives and going away from the sound of the shots. So not the fire alarm. That is not what should be used. Now, I'll give you an example. Many of you may remember the shooting at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. This was several years ago. I saw an interview of a couple of women that had survived that incident by a news reporter. And the reporter asked one of the ladies, how did you know you had a problem in the building? And she said, well, first the fire alarm went off. He said, what'd you do? And she said, well, nothing really. I was going to continue my work and then eventually we'd leave. It was just another drill. And he said, well, how did you know that you had a serious event, that there was a man with a gun in the building? She said, well, the fire warden, I guess in their fire evacuation drill, they have area wardens that they call them. He came running down the hallway yelling, there's a man in the building with a gun, get out. She said, that was our indication that we had a serious problem. At that point, her and her coworker got out from behind their cubicles, walked down an aisleway, and saw the shooter. Luckily, he did not see them. They were able to immediately turn around and go out a different pathway. Now, I don't know for sure, but my suspicion is the way they were headed out of that building was either the way they typically go out every day, or it was their pre-designated fire evacuation route that had been ingrained in their minds. So if you're evacuating from a building and you know the reason you are is that there's somebody with a gun in that building, but you don't necessarily know where they are and they're shooting people, then I am not going to go around any corner. I'm not going to go through any doorway. I'm not going to go down any hallway or any stairwell before I look first. I'm going to do it quickly because I want to get out fast and I want to get out the closest exit. However, I'm going to do it somewhat tactically. I'm going to listen and I'm going to look before I just arbitrarily go down a hallway because those gals got lucky at the Navy Yard. So have that now the only way that's going to happen for you to maintain that calm and think tactically like that and know where your alternate exits are is for you to have that individual mental plan. As I say, you can't dwell on this because it would make you crazy. But every once in a while, you should think about what you would do. And when you see these things on television, that might be a good mental reminder for you to think through what your personal plan is going to be. And if the organization has developed a response plan, you will then know that what you plan to do is exactly what the organization and the police department want you to do. It's important not to panic. That's easier said than done, but you have to think during the process of this quick escape. You really only have 3 options as an occupant. These sometimes have been called run, hide, fight. I prefer the terminology get out, hide out, or the last and least favorable result, take out. Actually confronting the aggressor, the shooter, only if you are required to and if you're forced to. Let's talk about these one at a time, keeping in mind that if you're forced because you're trapped into a situation where you have to temporarily hide out based on where you are relative to where the shooter is and you're trapped, that could become a get out opportunity as the shooter progresses to somewhere else in the building. So just because you hide out at first doesn't mean you have to stay there forever. The best option is still to get out. So let's look at these one at a time. First is to get out. I mean, that goes without saying. If I'm an occupant and I know because I've heard the announcement or the alert that there's an active shooter in the building, but I don't know where they are, remember your plan should contain that if you know where the active shooter's been seen, put that out with the announcement to give your occupants a chance at evacuating, at least in the right direction. But if I don't know where they are, I need to do it quickly and I need to do it carefully, as I've already described. I don't want you to have absolutely set predetermined routes in your mind, but I just want you to have alternatives where you know where all your exits in the facility are, so that anywhere you find yourself in that facility, you know where the closest one is. Now, it might sound obvious, but go away from the sound of the shots. How many times do you think somebody has said, well, geez, was that gunshots? I don't know, I'll go find out. And they go, look, that's not a smart idea. Go away from the sound of the confusion, away from the sound that may be gunshots. Because you're going to hear, as I said, related screaming and crying and yelling and confusion. That's not the direction you want to go. Now, the next bullet down the list might be the most important thing I tell you all during this session. Leave all of your belongings behind. You need to evacuate with absolutely empty and open hands so that there's nothing at all in your hands, and the responding police can see that. This has to do with the response of the police, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's a very practical but very important lesson that every one of these plans I've ever done across the country, every police department begged us to stress this. I say this for 2 reasons. Number one, if you weren't at your workstation, for example, you don't want to go back to your workstation from wherever you find yourself when the announcement comes out. You don't want to go back to your workstation creating hesitation just to get your cell phone or your keys or whatever. It's not worth it. Nothing's worth going back for and hesitating your evacuation or delaying your getting out of that building. But the more important reason has to do with the police response coming in. And I'll make that very clear in a minute. Try to get people to come with you. Remember that Navy Yard incident where the notification system, even though they used a fire alarm, and I don't think that should be your primary one, there was a secondary notification, and that was that gentleman that came running down the hallway shouting what their problem was. There is nothing wrong with that notification system. You verbally warning all the other occupants in your area, when it comes to your attention, this is the problem. That's a clear message, and you need to get people to come with you. They understand what it is. They'll follow you. At the bottom, it says, don't get to an area of safety outside and prevent others from entering. I do need you to evacuate quickly as an occupant, but you don't need to take it upon yourself to station yourself by the doors to keep others from coming in. In the response plan that we'll talk about, there are security personnel, there are responding police in time. There are others that will lock down the building and keep, or not lock it down, but keep people from re-entering. You don't need to do that. Now, certainly if you saw people coming in towards the building as you were evacuating, you can tell them what's going on and get them away, but you don't need to post yourself at the doors. Let's talk about the police response for a minute. I'm sure most of you on the line here remember Columbine High School. Columbine High School was the first real tragic event along the active shooter lines that kind of made active shooter a phenomenon, a thing that law enforcement had to take lessons from. And ever since that Columbine High School response, law enforcement has changed their tactics. At that time, and this was typical police tactic, so I'm not faulting anyone. In the Columbine incident, responding police officers, ordinary patrol officers that were armed, came to the facility, and the tactic at that time was for them to surround the building, establish a protective perimeter, and wait until the SWAT team arrived. Now, the SWAT team, they do this training all the time on building searches and clearing buildings. They practice frequently. And at the time it was felt those were the people that should be doing the active shooter pursuit. Well, what was found in the post-incident investigation was that as the armed policemen were outside securing the perimeter, there were more people being shot and killed inside the school. So law enforcement across the country said, whoa, time out. We cannot continue to do this. We have to change our tactics because we can't allow time to go by when we have armed officers there, even though they're not SWAT members. So now law enforcement's response is that the first officers on the scene, they will be going in. Now, these are regular, ordinary patrol officers. Now, they're doing a much, much better job in the police academies now than when I was a cop at training officers to do this, to respond in these incidents, to have that tactical training. But it's still nothing. It's still something that your patrol officers, your sheriff's deputies that are just policing the community on a daily basis, it's not what they do every day. So let me put this into perspective, and in no way am I disparaging law enforcement officers that are working the street, but they don't do building searching training every day like the SWAT teams do. They're out on patrol. They're doing, regular, ordinary, daily police work. They may be serving a warrant. They may be going on a domestic call. They may be writing traffic tickets. They may be working a special event. They may be doing whatever. And then all of a sudden, I'm in my patrol car, and I get this call on the radio, and I'll paraphrase, but it virtually says, go over to XYZ. There is somebody in that building shooting folks. Go in and get him. Now, as a patrolman, I'm going to do my job. I'm going to get there as quickly as I can. But by the time I get there, can you see where I might be just a little bit nervous? I have been thrust into the most lethal situation in law enforcement that I can find myself in. And I don't have a lot of time to mentally prepare for this. So I'm going to do my job. And my job now, as tactics in law enforcement currently state, sometimes there's a 2-officer or 3-officer rule, and that's by department. But the initial officers on the scene, if they are armed, they are going in and searching with guns drawn for that active shooter. And again, these are your daily patrolmen that maybe don't do this every day. It's not inconceivable to imagine that they might be a little bit nervous. I guarantee you they're going to be amped up. And again, I'm not criticizing. I'm just pointing out realities. This is a lethal situation. They're going to be a little nervous. There's going to be confusion. They're going to be trying to muster themselves and get themselves communicated, a system of communication. And amongst the patrolmen that are arriving, sometimes from different jurisdictions, they're going to have to come up with a search plan in the initial minutes to look for that gunman. As everyone else is evacuating away from the sound of the shots and the related confusion, they're coming in, guns drawn, going towards the sound of those shots. So now can you see why it's important for all of the occupants who are innocent to have absolutely empty, open hands? because that job for that policeman is hard enough. Let's not make them try to decide whether that shiny thing in that person's hand is a gun or a cell phone or a set of keys. It's a natural instinct. If I was an occupant and I didn't know any better and I'm in a panic and I have a cell phone in my hand, I see the police coming through the door with guns drawn. Well, the police are the symbol of safety. I'm going to run up to them because they'll help me. Can you see where a tragic but honest mistake could happen? So please stress in your plans that occupants evacuating have to do so with open, empty hands. It's going to be nobody's fault, but it's just going to make that police officer's job who's trying to search for someone who's shooting people a lot easier when they can quickly ascertain that that group of people over there with their hands up and empty are no threat to me. It's very important you remember that. Now, instruct your folks, and later on we'll talk about the design of a specific plan, but I'm just going over your occupant choices. As an occupant, if I've been an eyewitness and have seen the shooter, I want to offer any descriptive information. I may even know who they are if it's a former employee or a current one. I want to give description. I want to tell them where I last saw the person and point in that direction. If you just say, well, I saw the shooter back in shipping, those police officers might not know where shipping is. Point in the direction of the building where they were seen and get them started. Give them whatever descriptive information you can. He was a 6-foot-tall white male wearing a red hoodie. Whatever. Don't make up information, but what you can, just shout it out to those policemen. Don't approach them. Just shout it out as you're evacuating with open hands. You can expect that the police exchange with you is going to be rather direct and abrupt. They're not going to be stopped. They're there to help you as a group, not as individuals. So if you have eyewitness information, shout it out to them. Otherwise, don't approach them. Stay out of their way. If they're communicating to you in some manner, they may be telling you, if you've forgotten, get your hands up. Listen to their commands. They might be telling you, get down. There could be a good reason why they're telling you to do what they do. Remember, you're walking or you're quickly evacuating away from the sound of the shots. They're running towards them. So there may be a reason they're giving you a particular command. You need to adhere to that command immediately because they're not going to ask you twice. So expect an abrupt exchange. They are not, for the most part, going to be treating the wounded. They will go, their mission is to immediately go to that shooter and eliminate the threat. As the threat has been eliminated and they've cleared the building, then they'll tend to the wounded, etc. And they'll probably do it by section. I don't want to get too far into law enforcement and emergency medical tactics, but we can mention that they'll probably clear sections of the building, and they may have medical people come in, being protected by police, to take out the wounded. But the initial officers are not. They're going to the shooter. Now let's talk about the second option. Evacuation is your number one. 99% of the time I want you doing that, but you may be trapped. You may be in a particular meeting room or an office where you're there, there's only one way in and out, and the shooting happens right outside that door. Well, you wouldn't want to be bolt out through that door because you may run right into the path of the shooter. So that's an instance where you may have to temporarily hide out. Given that there's no way out, and if I'm on a first floor and there's a window available, I'm going out that window if I have to break it. But otherwise, I will have to lock and barricade in place. My objective here as a group, whether I'm in there by myself or with a group of people, I want to remain as silent as I can. I want to turn the lights off. I'm not just going to silence my cell phone, I'm going to turn it off. I want nothing to give away my presence. Well, I'm going to create the illusion, and we as a group, let's just say we were in there, there's 10 of us in a meeting. We're there, we're going to create the illusion that no one is in that space. See, the active shooter, though they are moving dynamically through the building looking for targets, they aren't necessarily searching for them. They are shooting people that they randomly see as they move through the facility. They aren't necessarily breaking into each room in most cases. So you may be safer if the shots are right outside that door to stay there, create the illusion that the room is empty. So let's just say you've been waiting there for 30 seconds. And the shooting and the screaming and the yelling and all the things that go along with this shooting, it's now not outside the door, but you can hear it way on the other side of the facility. Your option now bounces back to the get out option. You've now been given an opportunity. You want to quickly check the pathways, but you can tactically get out. If you can, just because you've hidden out temporarily, doesn't mean you can't change your plan and go to plan A and get out. So let's say we're back in this room with our 10 people, and a minute has gone by, and the shooting hasn't moved. It's still right outside that door, and all the confusion and screaming is right outside that door. Well, we're trapped. We're probably going to get whatever furniture, desks, chairs, whatever we can. We'll make sure the door's locked, and we're going to barricade ourselves in. And then we are going to have a mental pact amongst each other as we remain quiet and as calm as we can. We may have to calm some other hysterical people in the room, but we're going to make a pact with each other that if that shooter comes into that space, that we are going to prepare for option number 3. And that would be that we need to take this shooter out. We're going to rush them en masse. We will grab computers, we'll grab lamps, we'll grab large books, we'll grab whatever we have in our space, chairs, to use as an improvised weapon. And with the 10 of us, we're going to agree that we are going to rush that shooter en masse if he or she tries to come in and continue shooting. Now, I'll be honest with you. Might someone in this effort get shot or hurt? It's highly likely. But if we all just sit there, all 10 of us, and we cower in this space, and that person comes in, then all 10 of us are going to be shot or hurt or killed. So we're going to make a group decision that we're going to rush this person as best we can, and we're going to do whatever we can to incapacitate this person. And by that, I mean render him or her unconscious. They are going down. We have to decide it's them or us. They brought the gun in. It's not the time to be squeamish. You get as many people willing to do this, and you increase your chances of survival. Again, somebody may get hurt, but if you don't do anything, more people are going to get hurt. And don't stop. Don't stop the process until the shooter is down and incapable of continuing. In my terms, that means unconscious. At that point, you do want to separate the weapon from the shooter. Take the weapon. Do not take it out of that space and give it to the police, because common sense should tell you they don't know that you're not the active shooter. They see you with a weapon, you may get shot for your efforts. So don't take the weapon anywhere. Try to, in that space that you're in, that meeting room or wherever, hide it in a desk, hide it in a trash can, hide it somewhere so that if this shooter wakes up, he can't get back to his weapon. Don't try to render it safe. Don't try to unload it. You may know a lot about guns, but it could malfunction. Then you want to try to get whatever you can, extension cords, belts, purse straps, whatever you can, tape, and restrain the shooter so that when he wakes up, it's harder for him to move. Then you escape cautiously, and if you see police at that point, you just say, we've got one of the shooters tied up in conference room A, the gun's in the trash can. And they will redirect their efforts, and you can continue to evacuate. So those are really the 3 options for occupants. What I want to do now is switch gears a bit and talk about designing a site-specific active shooter response plan, something that every organization should have. I mentioned this before, but you really need to do this in conjunction with local law enforcement. Basically, and I've never had any resistance whatsoever when you call the police department or the sheriff's department or whoever is the policing authority in your community. When you contact them as an organization, even as a consultant, and say, this is what we're doing for this business. We want you to be included in this plan. And I've never had any resistance or any hesitation. They welcome the opportunity to be part of that planning process. Basically, they want to know what we're telling our people to do, and we need to know what their response is going to be. So it needs to include not at every stage, but at least in the initial meetings, participation by local law enforcement. Have a plan that fits your organization and your environment and occupants. A plan, this is not a one-size-fits-all. If you see, there may be some generic outlines out there, some generic templates for active shooter response plans, because they're all going to have the same components. I've done many of these. No two of them are exactly alike. They vary based on the conditions of that facility, the type of occupants, a number of factors which we'll expand upon. But basically, what might work in an office building may not work in an elementary school, and that might not work at a university, and that plan might not work at a shopping mall or a theater. So it has to be a plan that is specific to the access of the building, the occupants, environment, a number of things. They will have all the same components, which we'll review, but they're going to vary. All of the plans, however, will contain those same three occupant options. They either get out, which is highly desirable, or they hide out temporarily if they have to, or if they're trapped and the situation really forces their hand, they may have to physically try to take the shooter down. But I don't care how good your plan is. If you've gone through the effort of meeting with the police, perhaps of securing a consultant to help you through the process, and you've developed a site-specific plan, please educate everyone on the plan. Too many companies will come up with a great plan. It sits in a binder on somebody's desk, and the occupants, the employees, don't know their role in it. It's of little use at that point. So if you design the plan, take it to the next step and do the employee training so that they know, number one, you have a plan, and number two, what their role in it is. I would also suggest that as your plan is refined and developed, you can do some tabletop exercises or even mock drills. Tabletop exercise is a good way to start. Once you've designed your plan, again in conjunction with the police, invite them back to do a tabletop exercise where you work through various stages of mock drills just in a thought process, a tabletop exercise. That will sometimes flush out perhaps shortcomings of your plan, parts of the plan that may have to be modified that weren't practical or realistic, and you'll get the collective wisdom of all that participated in that drill. Some factors to consider when designing this tailored response plan is the type of occupants that you have. Is it just a situation where you have just your employees there? Or is it open to the public? Is it open to the public 24/7 or just for business hours? Are there any sensitive, restricted areas that require unique badges? Keep in mind that the police department has to get into this facility, number one, when they respond. Now, they have ways of getting into buildings, but it's a lot easier when you've made arrangements for them to get access badges and master keys and all access badges and all those things that are going to become part of your response plan to make sure it's easier for them to get in to help you. And they don't have to be driving through windows or breaking down doors or doing other entry techniques. You may have a situation where you have children or students or those that are incapable of making some of these decisions on their own. That's why the elementary school plans often are very, very different than what might be from a university, where the occupants at the university are much more capable of fending for themselves and evacuating and making those decisions and following a plan versus smaller school children. You always have to think about those that have mobility difficulties. Hospitals come to mind. It's one of the most difficult environments to design an active shooter response plan because, for the most part, a hospital may not be able to follow, in all cases, the evacuate first, because some of those people cannot evacuate. And the caretakers aren't going to evacuate because they have responsibility to those patients. So the hospitals and healthcare facilities are a unique environment where more often it's going to be a barricade and lock in place type of a situation, and that calls for its own planning and preventive measures as well. You may be in a multiple tenant building where it's not just your business that you should be concerned about. You're in a multi-tenant building with multiple floors, and the active shooter starts in the business above you, but it's still going to involve you because you're in the building. So here's where you have to coordinate, whether you're developing the plan or you're doing it as in a cooperative effort with all of the building tenants. It's in everybody's best interest to have a cooperative effort, because what one business's problem might become everybody's problem. There are organizational, cultural things that all of us are aware of that you need to be alert for, and that usually translates to how secure the facility is in the first place. Whether they have a tolerance for security as part of their culture, that's probably going to mean they have a tighter security plan and less of a likelihood that the active shooter is going to be able to get in or move about freely. The sheer size of your facility. You may have a multiple building campus, like on major universities or corporate compounds, corporate campuses, where you're not going to evacuate every single building. If there's an active shooter in one building, you probably shouldn't be evacuating the other buildings for fear that they run towards or evacuate towards the building that's subject to the shooter. That would be a combination of evacuation and lockdown. If you're in a single building, there's differences in plans from smaller buildings to larger ones. If you're in a small office building where notification system is simply going to be the sound of the shots, because gunshots would be heard throughout the whole facility, then that answers one of your challenges, but they're not all the same. And again, a notification system in any facility where gunshots are not going to be heard through the whole facility is one of your top priorities, to make sure all the occupants are alerted as to what the problem is. So there are a lot of different sizes of facilities, as you see. The type of environment, and this typically translates to not the quality, but the quantity and the speed of the law enforcement response. If you're in the middle of a city, it's likely you're going to get police officers there faster and in greater numbers than if you're in a rural, remote area where you may only have a few sheriff's deputies for an entire county and maybe augmented with the state police. Believe me, in an active shooter environment, in an active shooter emergency call, any jurisdiction in the area is going to be going to that facility. There will be a jurisdiction that's going to be defined as the primary, and will have incident command, and they'll coordinate all the efforts. But the type of community you're in is going to dictate basically how many police or law enforcement you have getting there and in what time frame. So you need to adjust your plan accordingly. What is the expected law enforcement time and tactics? Tactics, I've already indicated. Any police department I've worked with, pretty much since Columbine High School, since that law enforcement paradigm shift, their initial officers on the scene are going in tactically with weapons drawn, looking for that shooter. Very, very few exceptions. Now, as more of them get there, they'll be doing other things, setting up the perimeter. They'll be interviewing. We haven't talked about, we will in a minute, about evacuation points, but they'll be going to the evacuation point for two reasons: to make sure that there's not a second incident at the evacuation point itself, and to interview witnesses, because they desperately want to get any eyewitness information to the responding officers that are already in the building searching. So the tactics, you will exactly know if you've included the police in your planning phases, what they're going to do and how they're going to help you. The noise level in the facility will dictate what kind of notification system you have to have. Again, the PA system is the best. Any other backup mass notification system that is available, whether it's email or texting or whatever, those are all redundant systems, but I wouldn't depend on cell phone usage as your mass notification system as your primary. Mapped evacuation routes, or mapped escape routes, I don't profess that those are the best way. I think everybody should know where all the exits are And don't get people just like in the fire evacuation routes. There's a reason for those. But this is a different condition. It calls for different response. They should not just be programmed to go down a certain route. So I wouldn't map escape routes beyond having people know where all the exits are so that they can get to any of them from wherever they are in the building when this happens. You can say, has a general security assessment been done to evaluate your ability to lock down the facility? How easily, if it's indicated that that's your best response in some cases, or in a multiple building facility, etc. How do you do that? And can you do that? If you're telling people to evacuate, it's always important to have accountability. You want to know through your automated access badge system, through any roll call sheets or any sign-in sheets, through supervisors knowing who's on their shift. You want to have the best process or processes for employee accountability as possible when you do evacuate at the assembly point. Now, it's on my mind now, so I'll mention it. If you're telling people that once they evacuate out of the building to go to an assembly point for the purpose of accountability, you need to provide security for them. If you're telling them to go somewhere, you are still responsible for them. So you need to coordinate with the police. Now, the police are going to want to go there too to prevent a second incident and to make sure that perhaps the shooter isn't escaping with those people, and to interview those people for eyewitness accounts. So they'll cooperate with you on this, but everybody needs to know where they're supposed to go when they evacuate and what's going to happen at that location. I'm not a proponent of reinforced holding rooms. If that is, you may have an environment where that might be the case. For example, I did a casino plan at one point in time, and it was determined through that plan that because of the absolute security of their cash holding areas, those people in those cash holding areas were probably safer than anywhere in the building, even outside. So in that instance, just as an isolated example, those occupants were told not to leave that room, that they should stay in there because the active shooter is probably not going to be able to get in there. They were safer than coming out to a common area and trying to get out of the building. But I don't profess that that should be part of your plan in coming up with reinforced holding rooms. Floor plans should be distributed, obviously, to the police in advance, but it's a good idea to have them as part of, when we design plans, we'll come up with what I call go bags. And these are for the police. In those go bags, there will be floor plans. There will be things that will assist them in their search. There will be access keys. There will be master keys. Things that will help those initial responding patrolmen who may not be familiar with your facility get through it quickly and in somewhat of a knowledgeable manner. Is there any restricted access areas where those police have to get to? That master key has to get them in there. Plus what the role of your security is going to be. If you have unarmed security, that doesn't mean that they're going to be confronting the shooter. It also doesn't mean they're of no value. They will have roles that can be of use. They will be liaisoning with, or having met the police, they'll be kind of a communications liaison. So they'll be liaising with them. They will assist in evacuation. There are roles that the security can do that don't expose them beyond any of your other occupants, that they will evacuate as well. But outside, they may not just be evacuating to the muster point. They may have other duties like traffic control, assisting police. They're familiar with the facility. They'll be communicating with the police via radio as they're searching. So there are a lot of roles for on-site security, even if they're unarmed. Don't ignore accommodations for those that are on your property that might be mobility challenged. You have to make arrangements for them to be assisted. First aid at the evacuation muster points. That obviously can be provided by public services. But here again, it's important that if you're telling people to go somewhere to muster at an evacuation point, you need to secure them. You need to make accommodations for them. This is also a good time for you to readdress, during this active shooter response planning, your weapons policy with your employees. to make sure, and I say this because there could be employees that in their mind, because they have a concealed weapons permit, and they are legally allowed to have a weapon in their car, locked in their car in the parking lot. You don't want anybody evacuating and going out to get their piece and coming in to play hero. I guarantee you at that point, they're going to get shot for their efforts, because the police are not going to know that that Good Samaritan is coming in trying to look for the shooter. They're going to think they are the shooter. So you need to review your weapons policy, number one, to keep guns out of your facility, and to point out the errors that some people might think that they have the capacity to do and the right to do. Now, I have this next statement in red because it's extremely important. I said it before. You can have a great plan. If your employees and occupants don't know what it is, don't know what their role in it is, it's of little use. They have to respond with confidence. You don't have time to give them instruction at the moment. You don't have time to make an announcement as to what they should do. They need to have that mental plan in their mind and know with confidence that that's what the training has taught them to do. So it's important that employees, having a good plan is great. Carry it forth to the employee training level. All employees, not just supervisors. And last but not least, don't stay in denial, because you have to adopt the mindset that it could happen here. So at this point, I will go ahead and you see my contact information. I will ask you that if you would like a copy of the slides, please send me an email at my email, or you can call me, and I will send you a copy of the presentation. Certainly call me if you would like to have some guidance and assistance in developing a specific active shooter response plan for your facility or for your company. I have done an awful lot of that recently, and would be willing to help you with that. So at this point, I'll take questions if you want to submit those. We have a few minutes before our time is up. I would welcome them. Anyone have any questions whatsoever, whether we addressed it or not, if it's something was on your mind relative to this topic? Okay, I don't see any questions being submitted. At this point, I appreciate your attendance. And, oh, wait a minute, I have a couple coming in now. Here's one question. How does the open workplace affect response? Well, the open workplace, and I'm assuming by what you mean by that is you have public in, it's not an access controlled facility. It really, the way your response is affected, the plan has to make accommodation for really pushing the public announcements. Not using codes, by the way. I should have mentioned that. You shouldn't use codes in your announcements, because your employees may know the code. They're not any less prone to panic if you use a code, because if you know what the code means, you're not any less prone to panic because you know what it means. Furthermore, your visitors don't know what the code means. So it has to be in plain language. So I guess to answer that, it would be that if you have an open workplace, it really pushes the importance of you're having a plan, and that plan has to push the importance of notification and announcements to make sure everyone knows what's going on in the facility. The next question is, any special considerations for secure facility? I would suggest that if it's a secure facility, the access badges to either individual secured areas or the whole facility itself, the police need to be able to get everywhere to help you. So that would be my answer for that question. The next question is, how does an open floor plan, no offices, affect the response? No offices and an open floor plan, frankly, allows the shooter a more open opportunity to get to more people. There are less hiding places. So your plan still has to stress notification and immediate evacuation, because there's a higher likelihood that all of your people are going to be found in those open areas. There's going to be fewer places to hide. And hiding, remember, is not a primary plan. It should be your backup. So I guess that's the best way I can answer that. It really emphasizes how quickly people have to react, because if they're in one of those open areas, there's going to be fewer places of concealment and cover for them to get to a hallway to get out, for example. They won't be able to hide in an office temporarily while the shooter goes to another area and then they can get out. So the open floor plan just means that the shooter may be able to get to your people a little sooner. Secure facility as in nuclear power plants. I guess putting that in the form of a question, you may be asking, oh, I see it's the same person. The secure facility, you were just defining what secure facility was. Okay, I understand. Well, in the case of a nuclear power plant, for example, you're going to have much better physical security, but here again, you're still, and you may even have armed security. You probably will have armed security. You now have, depending on the training of the armed security, you now have an armed security force that can respond immediately to the shooter. So you're at an advantage, I'm assuming, in that area. But still the police are going to arrive. Still the police are going to need to get in. So your plan has to address those just access challenges that are going to be represented by a secure facility such as yours. Hopefully that answered your question, and that you have probably armed security that can respond quicker to the active shooter, and you have to think thoroughly through how the police are going to get to all areas of your facility. If I haven't answered your questions thoroughly, please send me an email. And as I said, if you'd like the slides, please also send me the email. I'll forward them to you. If you're interested, you have my phone number. If you're interested in seeking assistance at developing specific active shooter response plans for your sites, I can do that for you and would be pleased to do so. I don't see any further questions, so I appreciate your attendance, and have a good afternoon, everyone.